I'm Torg, and I'm here to ask you one question, and one question only. Explosions?
Sorry about that, wrong game. But to be fair, Greg's Reverse Fate is the explosive fanatic's gun of choice, bombarding an area with fiery pain for all that find themselves unfortunate to be underneath. With a unique effect that benefits from the more damage that you deal with your gun, a build done right has all the makings of either a fun mob killer or a boss killer that can do things like this.
Selecting objective.
In today's video, we'll be looking at my current build for the Greg's Reverse Fate, taking it apart as we look what makes it tick, what modules are king, what attributes can help you out, and lastly, what the core unlocked can do to make it better. But enough of the clips already, let's get right to it. So let's start talking about what the main kind of selling point is for the Greg's Reverse Fate. Well, like I've already mentioned, this pretty much bombards an area. Now let's have a talk about the main stats, and then we'll talk about its unique ability, and then we'll get an idea of what we need to be able to build into when it comes to modules. Now in this case, we do have respectable firearm attack, we do have a really nice fire attack as well, which is going to be coming in from the brand new update. So Greg's Reverse Fate really does heavily lean into fire attack just as base, and then on top of that we will be then adding even more into it from the fact that we're going to be adding in modules, as well as being able to use our core unlocked. Now in terms of like the rest of the stats, we can see that critical hit rate is pretty decent here, just as 20% as base. Critical hit damage is also a 2x as base as well, which is quite nice. And on top of that, our weak point is also something that we can build into, because we do have a 2x as standard. So being able to go nicely in balance between going into crit and weak point is really going to help benefit this gun, and that is something that we can definitely build into when it comes to our modules. Swapping over to the unique ability side of things, it is a fairly simple thing to try and understand and comprehend, but it's just one of those that is a little bit finicky to be able to get active once you're actually out in the battlefield. The reason why is because your bombardment has a 20% chance of being able to proc every single time you hit an enemy with your gun. So in this case, every single bullet in it fires in a 2-round burst. You have a 20% chance on each of those bullets to be able to proc a 7 bombardment or 7-round bombardment in that area. Now this unfortunately is a little bit inaccurate, which is why it makes it a little bit better for mobbing, but it also helps with being able to take down Colossus on big targets, because the more bombardments you can get to land, the more damage you'll essentially be doing. Now how this one works is that your bombardment, each one of these is going to do your firearm damage times 100%, so basically what you inflict with your damage of your bullet is essentially what each of those bombardments is going to land in an AoE, and the more the center of that explosion, the more damage they'll take. On the outskirts it will then drop off a little bit. Unfortunately that seems to be the case when it comes to my testing. Now that does mean that you can essentially 7 times your damage with the bombardment if you manage to get a single target to be able to stand underneath all 7. That is something that isn't very practical, especially in the mobbing kind of sense, but is something you potentially could manage to proc off when it comes to Colossus, especially with some of the larger ones that don't really move too well. So things like Frostwalker and Gluttony to a certain extent can absolutely take advantage of being able to land 7 bombardments, essentially septupling your damage from being able to land all those extra hits. So we have a fairly reliable way of being able to apply some extra damage over time for some extra DPS, but obviously this does kind of hinge on being able to get that 20% trigger on that bombardment. So unfortunately the only thing that really kind of hinders this gun or holds it back is the fact that that is a fairly low fire rate of being able to get that to trigger. Now fortunately, based on the other stats that the gun does possess, we can turn this into a pretty lethal weapon in its own right, and then the bombardments on top of that will then just be like the cherry on the top, the icing on the cake, any kind of like kind of saying that you want to be able to add in here. Essentially that is how we're going to be building Greg's. So we're going to maximize for damage, we're going to maximize for crit, we're going to maximize for weak point, and we're essentially, while we've combined all of these together, the more damage we start doing, the more that the bombardments will then do if we manage to bring those in. So let's start talking about how we can piece this build together, and of course, as every single gun that we are going to be talking about that we are going to be requiring to be able to shoot, we do want to be able to go into firearm attack first and foremost. So in this case we will be going into being able to go in the tried and tested rifling reinforcement, as well as action and reaction. Being able to slot those two in gives us a nice 93% increase to our base firearm attack, and makes it a bit more respectable when it comes to the amount of damage that we will be chucking out. Now we have already mentioned that we are going to be going into crit, so if we type over and swap to our crit modules, if I spell it correctly, there we go. You can see as to we can go into things like crit rate, we can go into crit damage, anything like that. So one of the best things to be able to go into straight off the bat is going for those blue modules, those better insights, as well as that better concentration. And that is going to help us out with a nice 37% increase to our crit hit rate, as well as a 48.8% increase to our critical hit damage. Now you can see the figures pretty much base as we currently go along. So in this case, we're almost tripling our damage from that critical hit damage, and we do have a basically 1 in 4 chance of being able to get that critical hit. Now we aren't just done just right there when it comes to critical hits, so in that case we will be adding in concentration priority. This will be giving us an extra 47% increase to our critical hit, and as you can see now we're nearing, getting close to that 4x multiplier, being able to land those critical shots, which is absolutely fantastic. Now we did mention that we were going to be going into weak point as well, because we do already have a respectable weak point damage multiplier. So in this case, if we swap over to weak point side of things, we can go for weak point sight. Weak point sight is going to be a fantastic way of being able to increase that as base, and that does put us up to 2.7x, but we will be taking this one step further and going for half aiming. Now this will get us an extra 40% on top of that, and that allows us to get to that 3.5x multiplier when it comes to weak points. Now weak points are especially important when it comes to this build, and the reason why this is an absolutely fantastic Colossus kind of killer is because those big massive weak point kind of areas that we can aim for will be massively increasing the amount of damage we will be chucking out, but we'll be leaving that one till the very end as to what mod we're going to be chucking in to be able to help us out with that. So we now have a total of 3 spaces left, and of course we are already built into fire attack, so of course it makes sense for us to kind of like emphasize that a little bit more, and we can maximize the amount of damage we will be chucking out. So if we swap over to fire side of things, we can get to see the fire modules. In this case we will be going for fire enhancement. Fire enhancement is going to give us an extra 30% of what our firearm attack will be added on top of this firearm attack, or fire attack right here. So we are going to be nearing closer to around about 20k when it comes to fire attack. And we can emphasize this even more by chucking in fire priority, and that is really going to help us out with increasing that fire attack. Now the beauty of this mod really over like other weapons that we've looked at before is the fact that we will be getting that 50% on top of what the fire attack was already base, so we are getting a massive increase from the elemental side of what Greg's reverse phase has as standard, and then on top of that we are also getting a 50% increase to fire enhancement, giving us 13 to 30% of our firearm attack. So this is putting us closer to 45% of our firearm attack. This is giving us an extra 50% on top of that. It is an insane amount of damage, and if we go back to the previous screen we can now kind of see as to what the figures are kind of looking like, and this is going to be per bullet. So the more we can increase the amount of damage that we are dealing out here, the more damage that our bombardment is going to be doing, because it does seem that elemental attack, even though it's treated as a separate damage number when it comes to your laboratory testing, it does seem to actually affect the amount of damage that the bombardment will be doing. So in that case, increasing the amount of fire attack that we can actually get into this gun is definitely going to be the way of being able to maximize the amount of damage that your bombardments will be doing. Now, this by itself is already a fantastic kind of package. We're already off to a great start. We've got some really nice ways of being able to increase our firearm attack. We've got a massive amount of increase to our crit. We've got some really nice bonuses for our weak point, and then we're taking our fire and just enhancing it even further by being able to go into both of these mods. Obviously, we've already got a really good, solid build for Greg's, but there is one mod that is going to make this so much better, especially against those Colossus fights, and that's actually going to be Real Life Fighter. Now, this one technically gets used mostly when it comes to shotguns because of how stacks work with individual pellets, but in this case, because of Greg's reverse fate and because we are going to be aiming for weak points anyway with the modifier that we already have on, while this is going to tank our accuracy in combination of half aiming, so we are going to lose 40% of our accuracy, it's still a relatively kind of like accurate gun, especially in short to mid range, so you won't have too much trouble. But being able to land those weak points is going to be increasing our firearm attack, and then being able to get up to 10 stacks with this, so we get a 100% increase to our firearm attack, is going to be helping our base damage as well as our fire attack, because this is going to help us out with the fire enhancement package. And on top of that, because we're then chucking all those extra DPS numbers into everything with crits as well as weak points and everything like that, it's going to massively scale the amount of damage that our bombardments are going to be doing. So this is going to be the best way to be able to maximize that amount of damage. Now, there is an argument to be made that you could go for, if you are looking to be able to burst down an enemy like really fastly, so things like being able to go into gluttony if you want to be able to try and burst it down with as much DPS as fast as possible. Because of how the bombardments apply burn straight away, you could make an argument that heat circulation deserves a slot in here. You could definitely swap out have aiming to be able to then put in heat circulation to increase the amount of fire attack that you will be chucking out. But personally, in terms of like just a generic kind of build, just be able to go into a fight and not have to worry about any kind of like uptime and downtime or anything like that, this felt the most consistent to me, and this is the build that I'm going to be recommending to you. Now, core-wise, the Greg's Reverse Fate has a couple of interesting options right here. So instead of being able to go for things like sprint speed and grappling hook and anything like that, we have two fantastic slot-ins here for the tactical augmentation. We have one into firepower, and then we have one free. Obviously, the special augmentation is pretty much null and void. We don't really care too much about that one whatsoever. But being able to focus on 4 of 5, really kind of like emphasizing a little bit more into the build, is fantastic. Now, the ways that I would recommend that you do go into this is if I click into this slot here, you can see as to what we've got. You will notice that compared to all the other builds where we've looked into tactical augmentation, there is one missing, and that is going to be rate of fire. Now, rate of fire has already been addressed by the devs. I believe this is going to be added in at some point. If that is the case, then I would recommend being able to slot one of these off for one of these rounds per magazine off into rate of fire. That will then be able to massively increase the amount of DPS you will be able to chuck out with this gun. I think rate of fire is a fantastic place of being able to go with this, but until that moment does actually manage to drop, and probably until core level 10 modules decide to drop as well, rounds per magazine is definitely going to be the best bang for your buck. So in this case, being able to get 2 rolls into that doesn't matter too much if you are going in for 6. Because 6 is still giving you a decent roll even at low values, but at 7 you will be able to get some fantastic increases to the amount of magazine size that you will have, and that is then going to take away some of the downside, some of the downtime, so you don't have to worry too much about reloading. You can just keep blasting away and being able to hammer those weak points. Now, in terms of the firepower augmentation, there really is only one kind of suggestion I would recommend for this, and that's going to be increasing your firearm attack. Now, the only reason why is because I don't have a role currently into Colossus attack. That is something that I do want to be able to mess about with, but as it currently stands, I've just got an increase into my fire attack, and that will be the one that I will be swapping out. But until then, I haven't been able to do some testing as to which one will be the best. Now, technically, an argument into fire attack, as you can see with my free augmentation, is going to be the best roll for it, but I think if I did manage to get the Colossus roll on this weapon, I think swapping out firearm attack into bonus firearm attack versus Colossus might actually be the way to be able to go. So if you do have Colossus on your Greg's Reverse Fate, then Colossus is the one that you need to aim for. If you don't, and you're like me and unfortunately you're missing it out just yet, then being able to go into firearm attack is still fantastic, because then that is going to feed into your fire attack, and then your free augmentation is then going to work really nicely of going into fire attack, so being able to go for these attribute rolls. And that is just going to massively increase the amount of damage you will be doing, not only from, like in Enduring Legacy's case, where just having fire enhancement is then going to benefit from your firearm attack. Being able to go into fire attack with this one is going to be helping with your base fire attack, as well as all those kind of extras and all those goodies that we've just chucked into with the module screen. Now, talking about how to get the most out of Greg's Reverse Fate in terms of like what are the best builds, best Descendants to be able to pair with, it depends on which kind of like side you are going for. If you're going for a Colossus build, then being able to go for Haley, being able to go for Blair, being able to go for Enzo, any of those typical kind of gun Descendants, you'll be able to get massive amounts of input from being able to go into them. So the Greg's Reverse Fate will essentially carry you through quite a few of the boss fights. It is a fantastic gun for being able to help out there. Now, if you are looking to be able to use this in a mobbing kind of scenario, if you're looking to be able to get the most out of it that side, then there's only really one Descendant I would kind of recommend this for, and that's going to be a gravity build for Lepic. To be able to give you an idea, this is pretty much what I'm currently rocking. If you want to understand the most as to how you can get the most out of this build, then there will be previous build videos on my channel as it currently stands. Just make sure you have a look for the latest gravity one to be able to get the updated one. But essentially the idea is that we are focusing on being able to use power unit charge to increase our amount of firearm attack, and then on top of that we are then using traction grenade to be able to hold all the enemies in place. This is fantastic for being able to go into defense missions. It's fantastic of any kind of like mobbing kind of it sucks in elites, it sucks in trash enemies, and while you're just absolutely hammering them away when it comes to like their weak points and being able to hit them with the bombardments, they literally cannot run away. It just is free damage, and it's just so much easier to be able to actually use it for Lepic. So I do recommend being able to go for that kind of build for it. And with all that out of the way, that wraps it up on the video for my recommended Greg's Reverse Fate. Overall, when the Greg's got its first round of buffs a while back, this felt like a solid choice to be able to use. It wasn't one for everything, but good enough to be in the top 5 of viable weapons. But nowadays though, that 20% trigger rate is brutal at the best of times, and while Greg's is still a decent tactical rifle anyways, there's no worse time than having a unique weapon with a unique effect that refuses to be able to pop off. Core unlocks do a lot for this weapon, but hopefully we'll see a percentage buff down the line. But this is the section I want to hear from you. How are you finding Season 2 so far? Do you prefer the Gregs for mobbing or bossing? And lastly, which weapon would you like to see next with those core unlocks? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. As I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well. I'll see you all on the next video.